The Expropriation Act has caused much confusion to many people. There are those who claim the act will lead to expropriation of land without compensation. Explain and Verify Samkele Maseko is here to help demystify some of the myths about this act and the furore around its enactment.
While President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the expropriation bill into law on the 23rd of January 2025, the newly assented to the Expropriation Act number 13 of 2024 Expropriation Act comes 50 years since the implementation of the old 1975 Expropriation Act 1975 Act. The content contained in the new version of the Act has gone through myriad of iterations, with the first version published in 2008, later in 2015, and the current version, the first published in 2020. Let's first dissect the concept of expropriation, its construct. Is expropriation a legal concept or not? Is it a legal concept or not, Mfundo? Let's look at our first particular slide. Expropriation. Expropriation is a tool used by governments in varying jurisdictions across the globe to take private property for public use with compensation, Mfundo. What comes to mind in the immediate is the expansion of the N3 in Pietermaritzburg. As you exit Pietermaritzburg going towards Durban, there were houses literally before you took the Scottsville, just after the Scottsville exit. Houses were expropriated there by government. There was equitable compensation given to those particular residents of that particular area for the expansion of the N3 between Pietermaritzburg and Durban. So it essentially goes to that particular aspect of the Expropriation Act that says you can expropriate for the benefit of the public good. That would be when it comes to the private equity rights of land. That would speak directly to some of the issues that AfriForum is raising in their roadshow to the United States of America to try and get them to meddle in the domestic affairs of South Africa.
And then you can take us perhaps to the second graphic pertaining to this concept or construct of Expropriation Act. Well,
Mfundo, our particular old graphic will explain the old act and the new act. It's a difference between the old and the new. 1975 Expropriation Act, market value compensation, willing buyer, willing seller compensation. This takes you directly to the ANC debate at the 2017 conference at Nasrec, where the ANC essentially said the willing buyer, willing seller method of land is no longer working in land restitution within South Africa, and they have to essentially look at expropriation of land without compensation, which was a resolution first endorsed by the economic freedom fighters, first also a resolution that was proposed in the 2011 ANC Youth League conference. Ultimately, it found expression in the ANC conference come 2017, which was ultimately defeated in 2012 in Mangaung, if you'd remember, and they still opted for this willing buyer, willing seller compensation, which was a hot potato as well in their NGC at in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, and Durban. That was a huge issue as well, but essentially that was the willing buyer, willing seller compensation. It is now essentially scrapped. Then you look at the Expropriation Act number 13 of 2024, provides for just equitable compensation. Just equitable compensation, Mfundo, is precisely what the government will offer you, or a market-related aspect of your property that will then allow government to expropriate that particular land, but it is not without compensation. We need to clarify that particular point.
Most certainly, and perhaps here we want to know what constitutes a just and equitable compensation, because that has become quite the debate.
Well, the factors in calculating just and equitable compensation, Mfundo, the current use of the property. What is the property currently used for? The history of its acquisition. History of the acquisition of the property, particularly the property value of that particular property. If you go to the city of Joburg, for example, and you purchase a property, let's say in North Riding, they will look at the history of the acquisition of that particular property, improvements made to the property, which essentially shares and has a bearing on the property value or the market value of that property. If there was any state investment made on the property, if previously the state invested any assets on that particular property, the purpose of expropriation.
Okay.
The purpose of expropriation, that would essentially mean what is that particular land being expropriated for. I was using an example, particularly on the new building of the bridge in the Eastern Cape, linking it to KwaZulu-Natal, that is currently built by a Chinese company in collaboration with the South African government. A number of homes, particularly on that stretch of that particular road that is being constructed by Sanral in collaboration with the Eastern Cape provincial government, a number of houses have had to be essentially expropriated within that particular area of the Eastern Cape, using the example as well of the N3 just after the Scottsville exit in Pietermaritzburg. When you're going towards Mkhondeni, a number of homes were expropriated within that particular area in order for public use to build and extend that N3 artillery road to the Durban Harbour.
So what has been happening between 1975, specifically that act, to the new act now being signed?
Well, Mfundo, if you look at what is happening between that particular period, it means that between 1996 to date, South Africa has been expropriating using a model that was at odds with the current constitution. All along in South Africa, the 1975 Act was used to acquire property solely for the public purpose, which includes examples such as construction of public infrastructure, such as public clinics, public schools, laying power lines, and more recently, construction of the Gautrain. And I also used the example, Mfundo, of the homes that were expropriated for that particular land in Pietermaritzburg to build the artillery road linking the N3 to Durban and the Eastern Cape as well, where the provincial government and the national government, working with Sanral, has expropriated land in order to build that particular artillery roads to improve infrastructure and also investments within the country.
And I believe we have a guest now who will expand on just this Expropriation Act that remains quite confusing to some, but to others is quite clear in honesty.
Indeed, we have a guest, Mr. Maseko, who is a national coordinator of Macau. A very good evening to you, sir. Just to get to the crux of the business, is this new Expropriation Act targeting to expropriate without compensation? Is the government targeting to expropriate people's land with nil compensation?
Well, if you read the law, it states very well that they will look at the land that is abandoned. And if that land is abandoned and there's no way of using it, that should be taken. Or if the land is issue of health and safety, and obviously that land can be, expropriated without compensation. Again, if you've got a land just for speculative, you are doing nothing about that land. Obviously, that land will be looked at. But each and every time that's expropriation taking place, obviously there will be a legal part of it. It just won't be an overnight thing. They come and say, we are taking this land, we are not using it. There should be reasons given, even to the law, to say why are they expropriating the land and without compensation. But obviously, if the land it demonstrates issues of health and safety, definitely sure that should be looked at it. But beyond that, we very much concerned that this law must be make sure that it's, especially, for instance, make the example of issues of Kolobeni. People were mostly wanted to be pushed out by the mine because of they wanted to mine it. People were not. So we are very concerned again to say it should not go, because easy people are poor people. We want to see it happening to those people who have land and staying in Germany without using that land. That should be that's where it should use. But Section 25, should people know about how the expropriation should happen? It should be equitable and just, and that's very fair.
What are some of the circumstances that may lead to expropriation or nil compensation according to this new Expropriation Act? What are some of those circumstances that lead to nil compensation?
Well, like I've indicated, you'll find that we have these mines that have abandoned the land and everything, and that land it's end up being very unsafe for the people, and it's now used for thugs and everything. That land should be expropriated, because if the circumstances of expropriating the land without really engaging the people, obviously that will be kind of unfair for the people. But it should be an issue of engaging the people now to say, what is the law all about? What does it say? Because as of now, how many people knows what is in the section 12, what is in the Constitution, section 25 about expropriation. Very few people understand it. And what you are saying is the very same people who are crying, who went to America to cry about this land. How did they acquire the land? It's something else. So that land must be brought back in a way that will benefit the poor.
Does this particular Expropriation Act go far enough in addressing the injustices of the past, like land disposition within the country?
We are very much concerned on that. That's why we want to really know how that is going to be dealt with, because if it's not going to address the issues, how the land was stolen, and not bring it back, then there's no use, because we are concerned as poor people, as a community, that is, it might even attack us to say we want to come and use this land for issues of mining and people must be removed and everything. So we are very much aware and wants to check how does it do, because we expect it to work for those people who have a huge land and not using it, and to use that land to benefit the public and the poor people to create jobs. But if it comes to us poor, we'll definitely resist that. We're not sure at the moment what is this expropriation be, because we know there's been laws, and those laws have not really attacked the elites, but mostly will be attacking the poor. So we are very much concerned.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maseko, for those particular points on this contentious issue of the Expropriation Act. One of the reasons why the budget speech could not be presented, because the Democratic Alliance's Helen Zille simply said, we will see how the budget will be passed, with President Cyril Ramaphosa signing that expropriation bill as an act of law earlier on in the year, amongst a myriad of other issues. But if you remember correctly, let's take it back to when Ronald Lamula was still the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services within the country. He was heading the ANC debate in Parliament on the presentation of the expropriation bill in Parliament with nil compensation. That was rejected by progressive parties
in saying
Parliament.
It was a watered-down version of the expropriation without compensation. Remember fully that specific one, Samkele.
Indeed, so that just tells you that this expropriation issue within the country is a contentious issue. Those whom are seen as progressives feel as if the current ANC is not going far enough in implementing what is drafted and written in the Freedom Charter, whilst those who are far right, like your Freedom Front Plus and many others, feel as if their private property rights are being threatened. Hence the mobilization of AfriForum on that roadshow they went on abroad to say injustices are being muted against the Afrikaner community who own land within the country. You saw earlier on the CEO of AfriForum with our colleague Mzwandile Mbeche trying to ventilate these particular issues.
Most certainly these issues will be debated in the country for years to come. But thank you very much for that. That is Samkele Maseko giving us this week's installment of Explain and Verify.